Hey, how's it going? I know it's been a hot minute since we've been in this room together. I appreciate your patience. I haven't just been sitting around, digging in my butt. I've actually been doing a whole lot of other stuff. Those close to me know all about it already. It's actually been a pretty brutal year for me, if I'm going to be honest with you, except obviously September last year. That was wonderful. Luckily, things are starting to turn a corner. I'm going back to uni next year, so this will remain a hobby for me, but I'm back. I know it's overdue, but I'm back, and I hope it's been worth the wait.
On October 7, the VFL directors voted unanimously in favour of granting the Brisbane licence to the Cronin QAFL syndicate.
Cheers now. Paul, it's official.
Congratulations.
The dream had been realised.
Oh, well, it's a very, very historic happening. The fact that we're going, well, it's national Australian football. It's the first step towards national Australian football. And it's a vision that I've shared with a lot of others for a long time.
Harris out to Jeffrey Rains, and it's fitting that Rains has the last one. And the final score, a resounding, a memorable, a magnificent win to the Brisbane Bears, 19 goals, 23, 137, defeating North Melbourne, 15-14, 104.
Right in front, the Tigers ball to Blake. He's heading on, Cody picks it up right of Browning, too slow. Then got it in. As they go now. Fitzroy and got it. They're into the preliminary final by 5 points. So the final scores, and look at Rendell running out to congratulate his teammates. The final scores, Sydney 13-11-89, going down to Fitzroy 13-16-94. It's one of the best games we've seen for a long, long time.
Barnard pushes forward, hard, the Bears have won! It was a classic.
The Commission met this evening and approved a merger relationship with the Brisbane Football Club and the Fitzroy Football Club.
Go the Lions!
And there's the siren, the end of an era, the end of an age for Fitzroy after 113 years. Where to for some of these youngsters? Brisbane will snap some of them up, others will go in the draft, and some mightn't be seen in the AFL again.
On the 4th of July, 1996, the AFL world changed forever. The first, and hopefully the last, club merger in AFL history was made official. The dying Fitzroy Lions would merge with the largely irrelevant Brisbane Bears to form the Brisbane Lions. Some saw it as the blending of youth and energy with a proud foundation and history. Others, particularly a good majority of the Fitzroy faithful, saw it as the rape and bastardisation of their football club and the erasure of 100 years of history. I have no affiliation with the original Fitzroy. My whole family moved up from Sydney long after the original Lions had gone to God, but I've always had a lot of empathy for the Fitzroy supporters, and I think they have every right to feel that way. They're kind of right, to be fair. In any case, what followed this historic merge was a broken, divided football club who fell off a cliff from a prelim in 1996 to a wooden spoon in 1998. The AFL had gotten what they wanted, and in the process, they had killed two football clubs. The Brisbane Lions were doomed from the start. They would never amount to anything. They were a disgraced, hopeless, pathetic, incompetent, good-for-nothing, half-assed, pathetic excuse for a football club. Until they weren't. Thanks to several key people and a few generational talents over the years, we avoided what would have happened if we did it all over again with several key pieces missing. 30 years later, we Queenslanders and holdouts from the Fitzroy years have been blessed with 3 decades of unparalleled success. Today, in the new year of our Lord 2026, we are looking back at 30 years of the Brisbane Lions, and if anybody says I should be waiting until next year to make this video, I hope your house blows up. The merger was finalised in 1996. I am not waiting another year to make this video. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you'll remember my video that I made on the Brisbane Bears, talking from the inception all the way to the merger. If you want to know more about the Brisbane Bears, give that one a watch. In the meantime, let's talk about Fitzroy. I want to make a full dedicated video on Fitzroy's entire history, but in the meantime, let's go through a brief rundown before we get into the merge. The Fitzroy Football Club were one of the foundation clubs of the Victorian Football League. Initially, in 1883, they joined the Victorian Football Association before joining the VFL in 1897, winning a single VFA premiership in 1895. The Fitzroy Maroons would finish 6th in their inaugural year, but would end up winning the first ever VFL Grand Final the very next year to become the VFL Premiers for the first time. Had the VFL Premiership been awarded using the original system of whoever finishes on top of the ladder gets awarded the Premiership, Essendon would have gone back to back, and in modern times, they'd be the only club with 17 premierships, but progress got in the way, so oh well. In the first 10 years of the VFL, Fitzroy was by far the most successful club. They won 4 premierships and finished runner-up on 3 different occasions. They earned the nickname the Unbeatables in 1913, where they won 16 out of 18 games and the premiership that year. But they ended up jinxing themselves because in 1916, they stank like booty hole. They ended up finishing last on the ladder, winning only 2 games. Now, you'd think that's where the story for this year ends, right? But thanks to a little thing called World War I, only 4 teams competed in the VFL this year. And the system for finals that around that time was whoever finished in the top 4 would qualify for finals. Since there was only 4 teams in the competition, Fitzroy would qualify for finals despite being last on the ladder. So you'd think this would be a non-issue for the other 3 teams. In fact, Carlton had won 10 out of the 12 games that year and were the clear favourites. But then, out of nowhere, Fitzroy would upset Collingwood by 6 points, beat Carlton by 23 points, and beat them again in the grand final by 29 points. And they won their 6th AFL premiership from last on the ladder. This was the first and probably the last time that a VFL AFL team won a premiership from last on the ladder. This is what I mean about the Fitzroy Lions needing their own video. In fact, World War I needs its own video. There's so much crazy stuff in the club's history that just doesn't get talked about anymore, simply because it happened so long ago. Anyway, Fitzroy won their 7th premiership against Collingwood, and this would begin a bit of a rough patch for the Maroons. They wouldn't make finals at all from 1925 until 1942. Rather, this would be a time of individual achievements rather than team ones. Hayden Bunton Sr., quietly one of the greatest Australian football players of all time, would come to Fitzroy with illegal payments and won 3 Brownlows, being joined by Wilfred Smallhorn and Denny Ryan. Jack Moriarty would set a number of goal-kicking records, and the Fitzroy Football Club would adopt the Gorillas as their name and mascot. Eventually, Fitzroy would turn a corner and win their 8th and final VFL premiership against Richmond at Junction Oval. They would become the Fitzroy Lions in 1957, and this would be the beginning of the club's slow decline and eventual death spiral. It got to a stage where they would only win 1 game in 1963 against Geelong. In fact, this game would be known as the Miracle Match, 50 years before the modern miracle. Time really is a flat circle. 1964 would be, as of writing, the only winless season in the men's competition since 1950. This would be another period carried by individual success. Fitzroy and Brisbane Lions legend Kevin Murray would win his Brownlow medal in 1969. I personally don't think this guy gets enough credit and praise from modern Brisbane Lions fans, myself included. This man was critically important in the success of the merger. He is the man. The Brunswick Street Oval change rooms were condemned in 1966, and this began the nomad era of the Fitzroy Football Club. Constantly bouncing between different footy grounds for a home base, they moved to the Junction Oval and had a promising 1970s, winning the Night Premiership in 1978, and in 1979 they recorded the then highest score of 36-22-238, and still the highest winning margin in history, 190 points. In 1980, they got to star in the cult classic footy movie, The Club, where the Lions lost a fictional grand final to Collingwood. Wow, what agonizing, heartbreaking foreshadowing. They carried this momentum from the 70s into the 80s with 4 finals appearances, spearheaded by coaches Robert Walls and David Parkin, and such players as Bernie Quinlan, Ron Alexander, Gary Wilson, Gary Pert, and Paul Roos. They would win their last final in 1986, beating Sydney by 5 points. They would reach the preliminary final and get their cheeks clapped by eventual premiers Hawthorn, and this was as good as it would ever get for the rest of their existence. After they got booted out of Junction Oval, it was hard to build a stable, functioning footy club, and it makes me wonder, had they not been evicted from the Junction Oval, would they have fared any better? Maybe, maybe not. They would almost relocate to Brisbane in 1986. Even the players voted for it, but for one reason or another, it never eventuated. The end of the 80s were the beginning of the demise for Fitzroy. The supporters of the Footscray Bulldogs fought off a merger with Fitzroy in 1989, and the Lions were trying absolutely everything to keep themselves alive, playing home games in Tasmania, trying to avoid a hostile takeover by the Bears before the 1996 merge. They moved to the Western Oval in 1994 to try and bring stability to the club. They were really fighting for their lives at this stage. Financial troubles weren't uncommon in the VFL, but for whatever reason, Fitzroy couldn't shake it. 1996 was the year it all came to a head. The AFL gave them enough money to compete in the 1996 season, but that was it. They would either merge or they would be compromised to a permanent end. It looked like they would merge with the Kangaroos to become the North Fitzroy Kangaroos, but at the last second, the other clubs killed this idea.
Do you like the idea of North Fitzroy?
No, we're not going to have a barrable list of 54 players, and I don't think there's any support within the competition other than 2 clubs for that.
What about if Brisbane stand up and say they'll have a merger with 42?
We'd be very interested in that.
And the Brisbane Bears would swoop in and form the Brisbane Bears Fitzroy Football Club and play as the Brisbane Lions from 1997 onwards. So, like I said, Fitzroy needs its own video. It's hard to sum up over 100 years of history in one segment of a larger video. Again, if you want to know more about the Bears, check out my Brisbane Bears video, but the short story is they joined the league in 1987 with West Coast. West Coast got to win premierships and enjoy success, and Brisbane were left rotting on the Gold Coast, only moving to Brisbane in 1992, playing on a retired dog racing track before the Gabba got redeveloped in 1993 for a permanent move to Brisbane. They had 2 good years and then nearly made a grand final in 1996 before becoming the Brisbane Lions in 1997. So the Brisbane Lions are a thing now. Hooray! Pre-season was pretty standard, or as standard as you could get, having been a part of the only merger in AFL history. They drafted Rory Hilton and Tim Notting. 2 premierships between them. Not a bad effort at draft night. We also drafted one of the greatest of all time, Chris Johnson, just quietly, And can't forget about my man Simon Hawking. John Norvey would carry on as senior coach after the successful finals campaign the year before. We had a home attendance of 19,950 on average, and we had 16,769 members. Pretty solid foundation for the new entity. Things started off slow with a loss to the Adelaide Crows in our first ever game, but we bounced back with our first ever win as a merged club, coming against St Kilda by 97 points. We went to Waverley Park and lost to Hawthorn by 12 points. Then we came back and beat North Melbourne at home by 26 points. Then we lost 4 games in a row to the other new club, Port Adelaide, alongside Essendon, West Coast, and Fremantle. I gotta stop saying we, by the way. I don't know what I'm doing with this we business. I wasn't even alive when these games occurred. Anyway, they bounced back with wins against Geelong and Sydney, both at the Gabba. They lost to Carlton at Princess Park, but went on and achieved their first win at the MCG as a merged entity. Then came wins against Collingwood, Richmond, the Bulldogs, and the Crows. A loss to St Kilda, a win against Hawthorn, a loss to the Kangaroos, and a draw against the Power. And 2 losses against Essendon and West Coast to finish off the season. The brand new Lions ended up 8th on the ladder, finishing just above Port Adelaide on percentage. And then we got subject to a one-on-one Diddy party with the rampaging Saints at Waverley Park. first playing 8th. That's not really fair, is it? Probably why they changed the system eventually. Oh, Jesus. Okay, that's a load-bearing water bottle. Fuck. My fault. Okay. That'll do. So, where were we? But, not a bad year. Not bad at all. A good foundation to build off. The Lions can go back to the drawing board, reload, go again, and win the wooden spoon and get John Norby sacked after round 11. And also, while this was happening to the poor old Lions, down the road, the fucking Brisbane Broncos just won the premiership, while the Lions are left rotting at the old Greyhound track at Wollongabba. So something was still broken within the club. Things were worse off than we thought. How do we go about fixing it? How do we go about uniting the club? As the Lions fought off St Kilda in the last round of the 1998 season to win by a point at home, up in the Channel 7 commentary box was Hawthorn Premiership player and Collingwood Premiership coach Lee Matthews.
Well, hasn't this game changed around? All of a sudden the pressure goes the other way because Brisbane really probably had the game won there about 5 minutes to go, and then all of a sudden when St Kilda are now on terms, you start to panic a little bit because, gee, we should have had this game.
He had left Collingwood in 1995 and was enjoying a cushy life in the world of footy media. Now, what most people don't know is that during this game, Lee Matthews had already committed to join the Brisbane Lions. The outside world, however, didn't think he was interested. Instead, the media was focused on Jared Healy, Gary Lyon, Dermot Brereton, and Tim Watson as potential coaches for the club. It turns out Matthews was the only person interviewed for the job, and much to the delight of the AFL, Lee Matthews was now the coach of the Brisbane Lions, and the effect was immediate.
This group, unfortunately, you've had to cross the bear a little bit. They keep saying how talented this group is. What you've learned is how hard to pressure the opposition into submission. That is the basis of this team.
The Lions surged from last on the ladder to third, almost making the grand final, eventually losing to eventual premiers North Melbourne. 2000 was another solid year, making finals again, but getting destroyed by Carlton by 82 points in week 2. 2001 was initially a mixed year. Prior to round 8 against Carlton, they were sitting at 4 wins and 3 losses, 5th on the ladder, when they went to Princess Park and had an absolutely abysmal, disgusting, dank performance against Carlton. It was a disaster, and it was clear that something was missing. Something wasn't working with this group. This group with all the potential in the world and the AFL Player of the Century coaching them. After melting an ASADA agent, Lee Matthews would have his light bulb moment. Trust. The missing ingredient. Trust in each other. And trust in the process. After a close loss to Adelaide came the now famous round 10 game against Essendon at the Gabba. If it bleeds, we can kill it. From that moment on, the switch was flipped. They won 15 games in a row, and they didn't just win, they dominated. The closest winning margin, including the first 2 weeks of finals, was 21 points against North Melbourne in round 17. The average winning margin after round 10 was 42 points. But if they wanted to complete this remarkable run, they had to face the final boss, the Essendon Bombers, the reigning premiers who, aside from a few players carrying injuries, were still as strong and dominant as they had ever been. The first quarter was a win for the Lions. They were up by 5 points, but the inaccuracy had cost them a bigger lead. People like to talk about our accuracy in front of goal, calling us the Brisbane's like a couple of fucking comedians. It appears that this has been a generational thing. This has been going on for years, and it sucks because we almost kicked ourselves out of a premiership in 2001. Half-time, the Bombers were up by 14 and we had kicked 5-10, but it was a hot day and the beat-up Bombers were beginning to tire. Meanwhile, the Brisbane Lions, who lived and breathed the signature Queensland hellscape of heat and humidity, were able to overcome the hot and overrun the Bombers in the premiership quarter, kicking 6 goals to 1. Brisbane's pace in the midfield completely buried the Bombers.
2 goals for. They've done it. He's got the ball in his hands, Bruce. A bit of history here. Lee Matthews has been to the top of the mountain for a second time as coach. Once at Collingwood, and now he's done the impossible. Brisbane have won the premiership. and they've beaten the champs.
And so, the Brisbane Bears Fitzroy Football Club would win its first premiership. It was a remarkable day, a remarkable achievement. Most of the Lions who played on the day also played in the wooden spoon of 1998, and this day proved that the merger was a success. This is what people like Paul Cronin, Robert Walls, John Norvey, Roger Merritt, and many others had been working for since the days of being the pissant Carrara Bears, and it had finally come to fruition. 2002 was another good year for the Lions. They hadn't slowed down at all. They beat up on South Australia in the final series, and then met Collingwood in the 2002 grand final. Contrary to the previous year, where Brisbane were the underdogs, Brisbane were seen as the favourites. What had also reversed was the weather. Hot and heavy to cold and rainy. The first quarter was a slogfest, Collingwood kicking the only goal of the quarter, Brisbane going 0-4. Brisbane had gotten on top by halftime, but just like last year, the inaccuracy cruelled the Lions, going into halftime up by 8 points, but kicking 4 goals to 12. It got a little bit better by the third quarter, but by this point, Collingwood had woken up, and the margin was only 4 points. Collingwood took the lead in the fourth quarter, and then two of the greatest pieces of umpiring that I've ever seen in my entire life occurred. Anthony Rocker's bomb from 50 was rightfully called a behind, and then Alistair Lynch was given a free kick in front of goals to put the Lions back in front. Lee Matthews, who was mic'd up in the coach's box, picked up the phone for Craig Starcevich and said,
"You there? Go and tell Acker, run to the front of Lynchy. Run to the front, not to the back."
They reached the 5-minute warning, and probably the most iconic moment in Brisbane Lions grand final history for a long time, although recent events have kind of surpassed it.
Scott around the corner to the full forward area. Lynch can't manufacture a mark. Ackermanis, left foot snap. Ackermanis has kicked a goal. What a snap. Power. Here's a go. Johnson with pace. Carrying it to half forward. Nick Davis.
And so, Acker put it beyond doubt, with a torn groin no less. The Brisbane Lions were premiers again, in the closest grand final since the 1989 thriller. 2003, the players were a little older. They weren't as dominant as they were in the previous years, but they still finished third on the ladder. They lost to Collingwood in the qualifying final, and they had to go the long way through the semi-final for the first time since Lee Matthews took over. Luckily, they made light work of Adelaide and met Sydney in the preliminary final. By three-quarter time, it looked a little shaky. Sydney had every chance of running over Brisbane, and yet, when their backs were against the wall, they lifted. They turned a 3-point lead into a 44-point victory to get their chance at a third premiership in a row. This game was also the largest attendance for an AFL game ever outside of Victoria. Very cool. Now, because of the qualifying final a couple weeks ago, Collingwood were actually going in as favourites. The Lions were beaten up. Famously, Jason Ackermanis had snitched on Nigel Lappin for having broken ribs.
And Nigel Lappin here had, broken ribs?
Well, he did after the fitness test.
Lethal put him through a brutal fitness test to make sure he was right for the game.
Fight back, nigga! Fight back, nigga! Fight back! Fight back!
A lot of people assumed that Collingwood were going to be hell-bent on avenging their grand final loss the previous year. Everybody expected another close, physical game. But then, Brisbane came out like a bat out of hell. They got the lead within the first few minutes of the game, and they would never relinquish it. One of the most remarkable runs a team has ever seen was completed in emphatic fashion. For as long as the AFL exists, Lethal's Lions will be remembered forever. They did it the hard way, travelling interstate against two of the AFL's biggest clubs and supporter bases with an aging, injured list. And they made it look easy. And then came 2004. Now, 2004 on paper was a pretty decent year. In fact, they finished second, made quick work of the Saints in week 1, and booked themselves a home preliminary final. Or so they thought. In what has now become an infamous sliding doors moment, the AFL would force the Lions to play their home preliminary final at the MCG against Geelong. forcing them to travel and forcing them to play in front of a hostile crowd. This was almost a bridge too far for the old, aging, injured list. This was actually seen as the hardest year by the Lions. It was a grind, not a victory lap. Key players were getting older, younger players were coming in but not ready to carry the load yet. There were pay cuts, there were people playing hurt. The novelty had worn off by this stage. There was a lot less joy, more fatigue, and yet they still found a way. They survived. Shaun Hart was the biggest casualty of the game. He collided with Daniel Bradshaw and had injuries consistent with a severe car crash with no seatbelt. This would be his last game. There were others who would end up playing with injuries, including, but not limited to, Jonathan Brown, Alistair Lynch, Nigel Lappin, Martin Pike, and Luke Power, among many others, all of which was exacerbated by a highly intense interstate clash that they barely won. Their recovery was compromised, they were cooked emotionally and physically, and their opponent, Port Adelaide, had just as much to play for, having earned a reputation as chokers, finishing minor premiers for the last 2 years and never being able to get past the prelim, always being outshunned by the Queensland twin. And Brisbane knew this. Brisbane knew that Port Adelaide was going to be their biggest threat in 2004. Essendon were gone, Collingwood were cooked, St Kilda and Geelong weren't ready to meaningfully challenge yet, and that meant that the last team standing was Port. Port Adelaide had just as much to lose as Brisbane, maybe even more. Brisbane already had a legacy. Port, had they not won this year, would have been probably forgotten. In no uncertain terms, Port Adelaide was going to die in hell before they lost this game. And, Brisbane, despite all of that, despite the injuries, despite the two-headed monster in the forward line not functioning at all, the missing personnel, everything, despite all of it, they came so close. They were winning at halftime. Hell, even when Port began to run away with it, they were still only 17 points behind. If Ackermanis converted at the end of the third quarter, it would have been 12 points. That's very gettable. They were a lot closer than most people remember. Port Adelaide were awesome in this game, but so were we. I wasn't there. I was 3 years old watching SpongeBob. I wasn't there, but they were. And they were so close. And it made the decision to force the MCG prelim all the more controversial. Brisbane weren't the first interstate team to have this happen to them, but this was easily the most consequential, and the AFL agreed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have renegotiated the deal the next year to make sure that this doesn't happen again. 1 year too late, but, better late than never, I guess. Brisbane's players have stated point blank that this cost them the premiership. Lee himself was a bit more diplomatic, saying that it essentially reduced Brisbane's margin for error. Although in his book, he did state that he wanted to punch Andrew Demetrio in the mouth after the game, which would have been amazing. I wish he'd done that. Lee, if you're watching this, there's still time. There's still time, just quietly. I know you didn't ask, but in my opinion, this didn't cost us the game outright. I don't think that's something you can really say. We still could have lost this game regardless, Port ended up beating us with pace more than anything. They were younger and faster, but they had experience. They had beaten Port comfortably in the home and away season. I personally think, and you can call this fence sitting if you like, regardless of the result, this cost us the greatest grand final ever. Think about it. Think of everything that happened in the first quarter of the game. Imagine if Brisbane had a little bit more in the tank to push Port Adelaide in the fourth quarter. Maybe they win, maybe they don't, but both teams would have been fighting to the death for all or for nothing. This would have been a modern 1989 situation. This would have been one of the greatest grand finals of all time. Instead, Port Adelaide steamed ahead, and Brisbane had finally reached their breaking point. The margin doesn't do Brisbane on the day much justice, but in any case, Port won. They were the better team on the day, and good on them. Still fucking stings though. Also, Kane Cornes came third in the Norm Smith. So, had it not been for Byron Pickett and Gavin Wanganeen, modern day Kane Cornes could have been mogging Luke Beveridge with a Norm Smith medal around his neck. Jesus Christ. Now, in the aftermath of the 04 Grand Final, Lee Matthews wanted to convey a message of continuity and calm, not blowing everything up in a reaction after the game. Although it is kind of hard to achieve continuity when a good portion of your team is another year older and in one fell swoop you lose Shaun Hart, Alistair Lynch and Craig McRae. Nevertheless, the Lions persisted. They started off with a good win over the Saints and then 2 close losses in a row, followed by 2 blowouts, which had them at 1-4. They got back on track with a win against Essendon. They lost to the Dogs, They beat Adelaide. They had a close loss to Richmond. They lost to North. They won 5 games in a row, bringing the record up to 8-7. And then they lost to West Coast, beat Essendon, lost to the Doggies. And after their win against Hawthorn in round 19, they were 6th on the ladder. If they could round out the season with another win or 2, they might be able to make finals again, which after their off season would be pretty good. But they just completely crashed out. An 84-point loss to Sydney, a 30-point loss to Port Adelaide, and then came 15 9/11s, a 139-point molestation by the Saints. And this was truly the end of the golden era. This very game, mark it down, 27th of August 2005. This was when the AFL world and the Lions themselves knew that they were not the same team. Brisbane would watch September footy from the couch for the first time under Lee Matthews. This magnificent run was over, and it was a catastrophic demise. I won't detail 2006 and 7 as much because they were about the same. The Lions were kind of suffering from a little bit of confirmation bias. Their success was still pretty fresh in everybody's minds. You know, even though they lost some key personnel in Martin Pike and Darryl White, they still had enough in their mind, at least, to re-establish themselves and surge again. But that's not what happened. In fact, they got worse in 2006. The Lions were in denial, almost terrified of the R word, rebuild. Meanwhile, the heart and soul of the Brisbane Lions throughout their merged history, one of the greatest AFL players of all time, Michael Voss, would retire. Other critical pieces of the puzzle, Justin Lepich, Brad Scott, and Clark Keating would also retire. Mal Michael would depart, and quite publicly and dramatically, Jason Ackermanis would depart the club as well for the Bulldogs. 2007 was a little bit better, but they were still massively off the pace, and the Unk purge would continue, with Chris Scott and Chris Johnson retiring. But Jonathan Brown won the Coleman this year, so that's pretty cool. This was also the year that several familiar names for the younger Lions fans would get their start, such as Jed Adcock, Daniel Merritt. Fuck off. You fucking cheap cunts fucking up the fucking app. I'm not paying $14 a year, cunt. Fuck you. How do I... You know what? What the fuck is this? Go away. Paying for Apple TV. What is this? Go away. Get a job. There we go. Alright, we have a new fireplace. It looks pretty similar to the old one, but it'll do. Where was I? This was also the year that several familiar names for the younger Lions fans would get their start, such as Jed Adcock, Daniel Merritt, and Jared Brennan, among others. 2008 was about the same for the Lions, finishing 10th again. One thing that exasperated the exodus of premiership players was the recruiting just wasn't working out. Prior to that point, the last Lions draftee to make All-Australian was Jonathan Brown as a father-son in 2000. After they threw away back-to-back late-game leads against Richmond and North Melbourne, Lee Matthews had reached his breaking point. I'm going to directdirectly quote his autobiography, Accept the Challenge, for this next part. Yes, I do read, believe it or not. I've just taken out my bookmark, god damn it. Okay. Where? Yeah, here we go. So this is Lee Matthews, a direct quote from his book. I walked down to the rooms after the Kangaroos lost and berated the players for embarrassing themselves by failing to remain composed under pressure and for a lack of on-field leadership. As I arrived in the locker room to confront the disappointed players, I yelled, "You are the laughingstock of the whole football world." Almost immediately, I knew I'd gone too far. I was blaming, not helping. I then tried to rebuild the shattered morale, but in hindsight, the whole situation was telling me that the group was in need of a fresh start only a new coach could offer. So many times over the years, I've seen the honeymoon period that a first-year coach can give his team. The Lions of 2008 were in need of that new beginning. I just hadn't realized it yet. So that was that. Lee Matthews would retire as the coach of the Brisbane Lions. Now, to the outside world, this came as a bit of a shock, but internally, they had been planning for this for a minute, and they had already found what should have been a perfect replacement, the prodigal son, Michael Voss. At the end of the 2008 season, we saw one of the most underrated players you'll ever see, Nigel Lappin, retire. And he somehow managed to hold on until 2008, which is insane. On the brighter side, this would be the year that we drafted none other than Daniel Rich, who would go on to win the Rising Star Award that year. This was also the year that I started supporting the Brisbane Lions, my first game being Brisbane's 47-point comeback against Port Adelaide at the Gabba in round 21.
Shaney's still up. Looking for the spectator here, trying to take a hanger off the fence and put it down.
The big fella.
And away you go, son.
Might come a little fine for that one.
Michael Voss had as good a first year as you could have hoped for with a team who hadn't seen finals for a couple of years. He had a lot of young talent with heaps of potential and a lot of old players from the golden era to work with. And with Jonathan Brown as captain, they surged back up the ladder and back into finals for the first time since 2004. And a home final, no less, with the Prime Minister in attendance. It was a long time coming for Lions fans, especially younger ones who had only known success up to this point. It was rough going early on. Carlton kicked the first 3 goals, but Brisbane clawed back, bringing it back to a 6-point margin at quarter time. Brisbane took a 1-point lead going into halftime, but the Blues pulled ahead of the Lions, taking a 24-point lead at 3/4 time. When Cameron Cloke kicked a goal 1 minute into the final term, it looked to be Jova. But then Captain Brown stood up, starting the surge. Then came Hooper, Brown again. Us Lions fans got a taste of what we were in for over the next decade when Daniel Rich kicked a bomb from outside 50. In a dynasty team full of absolute superstars, it's easy to overlook some genuine guns, and nobody fits that description better than Daniel Bradshaw. He won 2 premierships and kicked 496 goals with the Lions, but when most people hear the name Daniel Bradshaw, they think about what happens next. He sent the Gabba into hysterics and put the Lions in front with 5 minutes to go. And then, if that wasn't enough, Daniel Rich kicks it across the face, Bradshaw grabs, steadies himself, then snaps from right on the boundary line to seal the comeback and send Prime Minister Rudd over the edge. And that was it. Vossi won his first final as a coach. Brisbane were back in a big way. It was an exciting time to be a Brisbane Lions fan. This game was the perfect combination of youth and experience working together. Yeah, next week they got slimed out by the Bulldogs, but it did little to hamper the expectations and excitement of season 2010. Just in case you guys were wondering, 2010 was my first full year as a Brisbane Lions supporter. This was all I knew as a Brisbane Lions fan up until at least 2019. So Michael Voss and the coaching staff took the semi-final thumping as a sign that they were still too far off the pace in terms of elite teams of that era. The path going forward, he thought, was to tweak the list and bring in some experienced talent who could help the veterans carry the load and bridge the gap between the young fellas who were still in the early stages of their career. Coincidentally, Brendan Favola had just blown up his career at Carlton around this time, and Michael Voss saw his manna from heaven, his golden goose. Favola, in a Lions jumper, was a salivating thought. Jonathan Brown, Brendan Favola, and Daniel Bradshaw, who, despite injury trouble, was still capable of winning games off his own boot. Like, that's a pretty solid forward line. They pursued Favola aggressively, almost a little too aggressively, because they would offer not only Michael Riscatelli, but Daniel Bradshaw, of all people. Just completely disrespectful, and it's probably what cursed the club until Chris Fagan came along. Like the curse of Norm Smith on Melbourne, we got given the Daniel Bradshaw curse. Immediately after winning a final off his own boot, they literally said to him, "Get ready to learn Victorian, champ." 12 years of service, all for nothing. Neither of these men wanted to leave, yet they were shoved out the door regardless. Look at the lads touring the Carlton's facilities. They look like they're at their nan's funeral.
You looking forward to having a look at Carlton?
See what happens, not too sure.
What about you, Michael? Are you looking forward to having a look around the pub and seeing?
Yeah, see what happens at this stage.
And the best part is, the trade got done and neither man went to Carlton. Brisbane got Brendan Favola for Lockie Henderson. They tried to offer Bradshaw a new contract after this, and he understandably told them to go fuck themselves. Went to Sydney, and by the time the teams faced each other that year, Bradshaw was mogging Michael Voss with torpedoes from outside 50 at the SCG. Meanwhile, Riscatelli would end up joining the Suns in 2011. The season was already cursed, and it hadn't even started yet. Furthermore, they would end up digging out Fitzroy's corpse and skull-fucking it when they introduced the diabolical paddle pop lion, bemoaned by Lions fans to this day, except the white Clash version. That was low-key pretty tough. Despite all this bad karma, the Lions went out to 4-0 and top of the ladder. and then it completely collapsed in a sea of injuries and turmoil. All due respect to him, Brendan Favola began to fall apart physically and mentally as his personal life began to unravel. Fev would write in his own book. I don't have the physical copy with me. I stole it off Google Chrome as a PDF. Just pretend I'm reading it off of my Amazon Kindle, if you will. Injuries played a huge part in our downfall. By the 6th week of the season, Brownie and I had both been struck down by groin problems that severely restricted us on the field. Many other players succumbed to injuries as well. The rock hard service at the Gabba was one factor, but our fitness staff needed to accept a lot of the blame. They made us too big over the summer. We were lifting huge weights and our bodies couldn't handle it. So Vossi and the fitness staff tried the Ziz method and it fell apart pretty much immediately. They massively miscalculated their recruitment drive, they botched their conditioning program, and it destroyed all progress they made in 2009. Had the injuries not happened, it might have been a better year. You know, Fev was in Coleman contention for a bit. He ended up kicking 47 goals in 17 games in a 5-win team. That's nothing to sneeze at. But unfortunately, he was a wreck, and he was gone from the Lions by 2011, needing to do work on himself and his family. Luckily these days, he's in a much better spot, and that's what's important. 2011 was a pretty diabolical year. Brownie was injured in the first game of the year.
Oh, it's probably one of the worst. It's obviously the most graphic, but in terms of how it affects me footy, it probably affects me footy the least out of all the injuries because I don't run on me face.
But he did give us the iconic "I don't run on me face" line, sitting there like he'd just been shot in the face with a shotgun.
Bye!
Unfortunately, this would be the first of many head knocks that he would receive, which would lead to his retirement in 2014. I was there for that game and I ended up crying my eyes out after the game with the Fremantle theme song blaring in my ears. There's no real highlights from this year. It's pretty forgettable, except for the drafting of Ryan Lester and the trade for Dane Zorko. I shouldn't have to explain why that's a big deal. 2012 was an improvement, but still unremarkable, except for 2 games. Round 8 versus GWS when Daniel Merritt got sent forward and kicked 5 goals in the first quarter, 7 total. I was there watching it and I had the Triple M broadcast in my earphones and they were going apeshit every time he went near the ball. It was magical. And then round 10 against the top of the ladder West Coast Eagles. Jonathan Brown's 100th game as captain. They staged a late comeback and then out of nowhere here comes James fucking Polkinghorne with a torpedo from inside the center square to upset the Eagles by 2 points.
From inside the center square! Fuck! I can't believe that!
I was also there for that and it was the happiest I'd ever been as a Lions fan up to that point. On field, 2013 was kind of okay. A little better, anyway. After the Lions won the prestigious NAB Cup, Daniel Rich winning the final Michael Tuck medal, it started off rough as guts and we were in no man's land again. Brisbane's position of misery and pain was exacerbated by never being quite bad enough to get wooden spoon picks, along with Gold Coast and GWS coming in and massively diluting the draft pool for years to come, so they couldn't even draft themselves out of it, and they couldn't even retain the players they had. This was the year of the infamous Go Home 5, where Brisbane lost 5 critical parts of their future core in seemingly one hit. The one highlight from this year was the Miracle on Grass, which I have covered in a separate video. I talk about how my Lions ended up costing Geelong a premiership with this game. But in summary, Brisbane came back from 52 points down, kicking 8 goals in the last quarter, and winning after the siren thanks to Ash McGrath. If I had $1 for every time we had an iconic win against the Geelong Footy Club, I would have $4. It could have been 5 if the umpires in that one game in 2021 weren't such gutless cowards, but you know, you take what you can get, I guess. This game actually sparked a bit of a resurgence for the Lions. They almost made finals. Despite needing several results to go their way, they would end up missing regardless, losing to Geelong by a point in the last game of the season. Off-field, however, things were falling apart. Vossi had seemingly lost the players and the board for that matter. There were some rumours circulating about off-field culture being an issue. Now, the following is stolen from a Reddit post, so take it with a grain of salt, but I had to include it because it's just so outrageous, even if it's most likely false. According to Old Mate on Reddit, there were particular rumours of a hazing and hard partying culture with Tom Rockcliffe and Pierce Hanley being at the centre of it. In particular, there was a rumour where Tom Rockcliffe went bang in Jared Pollock's boots. Another player was apparently also forced to drink their own piss. Again, this is probably bullshit still, but with so much player exodus, something wasn't right. Eventually, by June, Michael Voss was gone as coach. I will always have time for Michael Voss. He was a three-time premiership captain, and he took a gamble to try and get the club to another premiership, and it didn't work. He will always have my respect regardless of what went down post-2009. Another thing that expedited Voss's departure was the possibility that Brisbane could get Paul Roos as coach. Had they been more cautious, maybe they could have kept Voss for one more year, but in any case, Roos accepted a deal with the other shithole, the Demons, and the Lions did not have many options for coaches. They eventually found their way to another premiership legend, Justin Lepich. He said all the right things in his first press conference. He was enthusiastic and he was ready for the job, but the list was cheeks. Darcy Gardner was drafted though. He would end up holding Jeremy Cameron goalless in about 11 years in the 25 grand final. So, love that for us. But Simon Black had retired the previous year. We only had Brownie and McGrath left over from the golden era. Lepper himself said it best in 2016.
Let's be honest, I mean, as a club, we're in debt. We've got average facilities. Everyone knows that part of it. So we're trying to fix all the problems at once. Retain young talent, build a facility and give hope for the future so that our fans can see something. It's funny, we're doing this so we're not mediocre anymore. I don't want to be the team that sits in the middle of the ladder forever. So how do you not sit in the middle of the ladder forever? You got to get the best young talent. You got to go after it. You got to nurse them through it and play them and give them exposure. But you got to take a bit of pain on the way through to achieve that. Our experience has gone backwards. I think we lost 1,600 games in the 3 years I've been here. Yeah. But our youth, if you put a value on them and what they're worth in the industry, kids will be recruiters will start watching our games now. Yeah. I don't reckon they would have watched them 3 years ago, trying to pull blokes out of our team. But now they'll be looking at a Shaki, trying to drag him out, trying to look at a Hipwood, trying to be looking at Harris Andrews, Reece Matheson. So we've got some guys and some names there that people look at and go, geez, they're going to be they're good young players. So
2014 was a disappointing, painful year. It was another unremarkable draft year, except for our 61st pick in the 4th round. Nobody knew it at the time, but the first piece of the puzzle was just drafted. Out of the Lions Academy, none other than Harris Andrews. Jonathan Brown would end up retiring after his 4th headlock in a demoralising loss to the GWS at home in front of 12,000 odd people in an empty Gabba. I was there for this game and it was one of my worst footy memories, up there with the 2021 semi-final and the 23 grand final. This was their first win away from home, GWS. I remember after the head knock, crying in the concourse with my dad trying to console me. I remember the final siren, how silent it was, and with the giant song blaring over the speakers. I remember reading the news of his retirement over the next couple of days and being shattered. Brownie, Simon Black, Ash McGrath, Daniel Sauce Merritt, and Daniel Rich were all we had back then, man. We had others, but they were the legends and the cult heroes. They gave us the most to cheer about. Losing Brownie hurt like hell, and it was so demoralising. It was for the players as well. In that game, it went from a 1-point game in the 3rd quarter to a 45-point loss. It stung. It still does to this day. The rest of the year was pretty booty. Ash McGrath ended up retiring, so there were no more premiership players on our list. Our big get in the off-season was Dane Beams. Also, we got Alan Christensen and Mitch Robinson from Geelong and Carlton respectively, and these guys were critical. They were very important in the early Chris Fagan era. They were pretty good gets in hindsight. Plus, just quietly, this was the year we drafted Eric Hipwood, and we also drafted another cult figure in Reece Matheson. This was also the year that they ditched the paddle pop line jumpers and went back to the traditional Fitzroy line on the front, something that was very, very popular with fans. I was so checked out as a Lions supporter by this stage. I remember we went to Melbourne for a weekend to watch GWS, who were our second team. My whole family is from Sydney. And that weekend, we got our cheeks clapped by Fremantle in Perth, and I just did not give a single shit. 2016 was another dog shit year, it must be said. The lowest point came in round 20 in Adelaide, losing by 138 points. The Lions missed out on the wooden spoon by 0.6%. Lepich reportedly went to the board and informed them that he intended to gut the list and play the kids. It was going to be painful, but it had to happen. Despite knowing he was not tanking but prioritising development, the board went and sacked him anyway. Poor guy. He got one back on us a couple of years later though, so, good on him. There were a lot of injuries this year as well. Trent West retired and then he had to get brought back as an emergency, so Lepage didn't have a lot to work with. In any case, the decision was made. But on the upside, our shitty ladder position gave us a good night at the draft. I'm not sure if there was a personnel change or if our selectors just locked in, but Brisbane drafted in one night, mind you, Hugh McCluggage, Jared Berry, and one of Brisbane's most beloved players in its history, I'd argue, Oscar McInerney. David Noble was brought in as football boss, someone who doesn't get the credit he deserves for Brisbane's current position, I might add. And just a week later, the Lions would host another press conference. They had found their new coach.
The floor's open and away you go.
Chris, first, what was the feeling about the job for you?
Well, the great weather to start with. No, look, I think Brisbane have got a really talented young list, and their best football is ahead of them. And I think they really need a coach who can develop that talent, and I feel like that's one of my great strengths. And very much looking forward to taking up that opportunity in the weeks and months ahead.
Chris Fagan, a remarkable man with a remarkable story. He had never even played footy at the AFL level, but Neil Danaher gave him his start with Melbourne, serving at the club from 1999 to 2007 and helping him get to a grand final in 2000. Hawthorn snatched up in 2008, and he initially served as head of coaching and development and then the general manager of football, basically right-hand man to Alistair Clarkson. He was very important to the club's 4 premierships, especially when he was a general manager during the three-peat. That's a pretty solid resume. Now, after 17 years in the AFL system, he's finally got his chance to be a senior coach. He was the right man for the job. He was genuinely excited about the list, and he could see the vision. What he, the older players, and the younger draftees could build the club into in, say, 5 or so years. Brisbane's 2 big draft picks, Jared Berry and Hugh McCluggage, got their start this year, but there was a lot of list turnover. Tragically, Daniel Sauce Merritt retired the year previous, and most likely as a direct result, Brisbane would win the wooden spoon. So the men's team is bottom of the ladder, but honestly nobody really gives a shit. Brisbane knew they were in for a rebuild. They knew Fagan needed time. They knew they were in for a big night at the draft, so this was not the time for panic and anguish. They drafted just quietly. The number 1 pick in the draft, Brisbane selected Cameron Rayner. Number 15 in the draft, Zach Bailey. Number 18 in the draft, Brandon Starcevich. Number 3 at pick 54, Jack Payne. Another big get for the Lions. Luke Hodge came out of retirement and joined the Lions, which probably wouldn't have happened if Fags wasn't coaching. Furthermore, Brisbane would give up pick 12 to the Adelaide Crows and get none other than Charlie Cameron. Also, former captain Tom Rockcliffe would depart the club for Port Adelaide. Thank you for your service, mate. Now, it was a big start to the year for Fagan's Lions, taking out the prestigious AFLX Premiership. However, it was a brutal start to the home and away season, going 0-8, including 2 agonisingly close losses by 5 points and 7 points. Then they broke through in a monster way, defeating Hawthorn by 56 points at the Gabba. They would lose 4 more games, Dane Beams would step down as captain due to personal reasons, and Dane Zorko would take over in his place. 3 big wins in a row, a couple blowouts, and some more close losses, including a missed chance to win the game by young Cam Rayner against North Melbourne, which gave us this little soundbite from Fags after the game.
I was pretty glad he had the ball in his hands in the dying stages to win a game of footy, and as a lot of our young players did, they stood up. They might have made some mistakes during that period, but it'll stand them in good stead down the track, and I'm sure Cam Rayner and his career at this footy club will make up for that one over and over again.
Brisbane ended up finishing 15th, off the bottom of the ladder, but still bottom 4. Brisbane was still in a transitional year though. There were 7 debutants for the Lions, 5 of which being their first games in the AFL. 2019 started off in a big way for the Lions, getting rid of Dane Beams after he got up at the BNF and announced that he was not leaving. You'll never guess what happened next. The This was a comparatively quiet draft. The only big get in hindsight was Noah Answorth. Oh, and just quietly, we got Lachie Neale from Fremantle. He's all right, I guess. A lot of people thought that if Brisbane could win a few more close games, they might be able to surge back up the top of the ladder, and they were proven right the next year. They beat the reigning premiers in round 1 comfortably, and they never looked back. There were some blemishes here and there, but they were a completely different team than the 2018 Brisbane Lions. Brisbane was back, and after their classic round 22 win against Geelong with 35,000 people in the Gabba that once sat empty with fake crowd noise pumping through the speakers, nobody could deny it any longer. Had a few more wins gone their way, they could have been minor premiers this year. They had their first final in a decade against Richmond, the largest crowd for an AFL match in Queensland. Unfortunately, they kicked themselves out of a halftime lead, and Richmond, being the dynasty in the making that they ended up being, stormed over the inexperienced Lions and moved on to the prelim final. The next week, the inexperience was really exposed. That, combined with the shittiest umpiring decision I've ever seen in my life, plus Alex Witherden's effort against Brent Daniels that was so shit, it ended his career at Brisbane. Brisbane were out in straight sets, but they lost no admirers. Charlie Cameron, Harris Andrews and Lachie Neale would all be All-Australian. At the end of the year, they drafted Dev Robertson and Kitty Coleman, two very important players for the Lions going forward. Plus, from the Gold Coast, Calamar Chi. 2020 was, a bizarre year with COVID. There was an obvious impact on the league, which I am going to cover in a future video. Brisbane would make the prelim, but bow out to Geelong, missing out on a home grand final at the Gabba. It was a quiet draft night, but the big news was Joseph Daniher coming to the Lions as a free agent. Now, despite this big signing, it was an inconsistent year. There were some bright spots, no doubt. Zach Bailey's goal after the siren, Brisbane's mad dash to get into the top 4 in the last game, barely scraping in, but there was just so many injuries. Just off the top of my head, Rayner's ACL in the preseason, Hipwood, another ACL, McStay bonking his head in the first final, Jack Payne in the semi-final, Jared Berry missed 13 games, Lachie Neale was out for 7, Darcy Gardiner out for 15. The final series was pretty rough. We lost to eventual premiers Melbourne, with our forward line being fundamentally broken, with Hipwood and McStay both out. And then, probably the most atrociously umpired semi-final that I've ever seen in my entire life. This and the 23 grand final are my two worst moments at a game. This might be worse than the grand final, in a way. 2 weeks later was my most successful hate watch in a minute. On the actual bright side, Kitty Coleman came into his own after being moved into the back line. So, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Plus, Brisbane had another healthy night at the draft, unless your name is Chris Duer, in which case this fucking sucks actually. Furthermore, Brisbane made what ended up being a very good trade, getting Darcy Fort from Geelong. 2022 was an okay-ish year, lots of good work being done, but lots of pain. That 40-point choke against Richmond at the MCG still lives in my head rent-free. I remember watching the end of that game in the cargo hold of a Boeing 737. I was a bag of Chandler at the time. I was at work that day, and watching on KO on my phone in a tiny little cramped cargo hold is a core memory of mine. Not all core memories are created equal. This was when Brisbane started to get a reputation of being a good but shit team. Some saw this year as a step back. Brisbane had pissed away a chance at top 4, and going into the elimination final at the Gabba, nobody really saw Brisbane getting past Richmond. What followed was one of the most remarkable finals in modern history. 17 lead changes. Brisbane are down by 4 points. Zach Bailey's set shot is touched off the mark. There's 6 Richmond defenders in the goal square. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Joe Daniher experience.
It's touched off the boot, no mark, offhands, goal! Brisbane have kicked the goal! Daniher's got it! Brisbane are going to win! The Tigers are eliminated! Brisbane go through with an epic elimination final!
This was nice. This was really fucking nice. Having been there the previous year, this was really fucking nice. I began to think we were cursed. But we broke through. Our first finals win since 2020. Now, Melbourne in the semi-final, you'd think this was a bit of a stretch. Melbourne are still a pretty dominant side, reigning premiers off the back of flogging Brisbane twice this year, including a few weeks ago at the Gabba. And it looked to be a similar story in this game, down 28 points at one stage. And then the second half came. Lachie Neale is giving himself a heart attack for the second week in a row trying to get us up. Hugh and Jared were superb. Joe Danaher had to fly home that night because his wife was giving birth. And that meant Eric Hipwood was all on his own. And he thrived. He kicked 4 goals and he had 17 disposals in the biggest game of his career up to that point. This is why I rate Eric Hipwood so highly. Like, he is capable of some extraordinary things, but he plays a difficult role, so he doesn't always kick bags, but he's important to us structurally. Any Lions man who disparages Eric can go fuck themselves, quite frankly. Dan McStay, fuck, remember him, sealed the deal, and Brisbane would meet Geelong in the prelim final. But unfortunately, lightning doesn't strike 3 times. Brisbane used up all their magic in the last 2 weeks, and Geelong were the team of 2022, so, you know, nobody was beating them. Not Sydney, that's for sure. So Brisbane's restored some of its faith with the supporter base, but there's still some pieces of the puzzle missing. They were almost there, and they were ready for a big 2023. If this isn't a good off-season, then I don't know what is. Through trade, Josh Dunkley, both father and son, Will Ashcroft and Jasper Fletcher, and through drafting, Connor McKenna. But it did start off kind of rough, you know. We started off 1-2 with the one win being that Melbourne game where the power went out at the Gabba. That was fucking insane to be at live. And then Melbourne almost won. Brisbane ended up winning 7 in a row, and then Adelaide did them in. A victory against the bye, and then a bad loss against Hawthorn, who at this stage in their development had no business beating the Lions. This was when Brisbane's ability to play away games, especially at the MCG, began to get called into question. It makes sense when you ignore Brisbane had just won a final at the MCG a few months ago. To be fair, Brisbane were winning so much at the Gabba this year that away losses stuck out like a sore thumb. Not the away wins though, they don't fit the narrative. Furthermore, after this game, Daniel Rich and new recruit Jack Gunston both stood themselves down from the senior level. Gunston would get back in later the same year, but he hurt himself against West Coast. Daniel Rich would not get back into the side, and he would retire at the end of the year. His last feat of brilliance, winning the longest final kick award. My man Daniel Rich, All-Australian 11 years after he won the Rising Star, but the passage of time spares nobody. People don't really understand, like Brisbane don't get to where they are today if not for him, if not for countless others. For people like me who were born too late for the three-peat and born too early for Chris Fagan's two-piece, we're following Brisbane today because of him, because of Zorko, because of Leicester and many others who stuck it out during the dark days. And I met him just after the grand final and I got to tell him all that, and it meant the world to me. I just wish he could have held on a little bit longer. But, you know, anyway, after that, 4 wins in a row and, you know, things seem to be back on track. And then another game at the MCG. If you've been following me for a while, you know about this game. I live streamed this game. This was pre-face reveal, so I'm there screaming behind a PNG as my Lions evaporated a 20-point lead and lost the game in the last 20 seconds. And then Eric Hipwood almost won it for us, but it wasn't a mark, although I did think it was at the time. Melbourne, Brisbane inside 50. That's a mark! That's a mark! That's a fucking mark! Ah, oh, that's a fucking mark, you cunt. What the fuck? Ah, oh, fucking hell, bro. That's fucking ridiculous. That's a mark, bro. What the fuck? To make matters worse, Will Ashcroft did his ACL literally the next week. And then we got our insides rearranged by Gold Coast after they sacked Stuart Dew. But then Brisbane won 4 in a row. Including a very frustrating win against St Kilda where nobody could hit the side of a barn. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Joe Danaher experience.
For 50 goals for the season, he hits the post from point blank.
So Brisbane's been able to muscle back a pretty respectable end to the year, finishing second and getting a qualifying final against Port Adelaide, which was just a magical night, dude. This was so fucking good. Port was competitive until about the second quarter, and then Brisbane just blew them away. Those back-to-back Charlie Cameron goals live in my head rent fucking free.
He did use his body really well.
Just when John Denver's royalty payments look like going down, Charlie pops up. And another clearance for Brisbane. McCarthy trying to get busy. Here's Charlie again. Cue that song back up.
Now Brisbane were able to sit back and wait for either Carlton or Melbourne to meet them in the prelim. I was cheering for Carlton in this game. I can't lie, bro. This was so good to watch. That Melbourne 1-point loss was still fresh in my mind. I got my wish. Carlton got up, but be careful what you wish for. Because the morning of this prelim, I was at work and I was a wreck. I had never had so much nerves and anxiety going into a game. My Lions had come so close so many times. And this was our best team. This was our best chance at a grand final under Fagan. It was now or never. And I had never experienced anything like this at the Gabba, ever. And I've been going to the Gabba since 2009 at this stage. We got to Wollongabba and there was so much blue, dude. There was so much blue everywhere. Everywhere I looked, we were surrounded. They had basically hijacked the second level of the Gabba. This only made me more nervous. And then Carlton kicked goal after goal after goal, and then it got to 30-0, and I thought we were cooked. I thought it was over. I thought we were going to get smashed by Carlton, and we were going to have to watch Carlton and Collingwood in the grand final the next week. I had left my seat, and I got myself drunk in the concourse. I didn't want to go back out. I had way too many ginger beers. I was thinking of quitting YouTube, thinking of quitting AFL, and then just by chance, I look out of my entryway into my section, and then who else but Eric goddamn Hipwood is there, and he's kicking our first goal for the game, and I thought, okay, we're a chance. It's still doable. At this point, it's the second quarter, and I've returned to my seat, and Oscar's just kicked a goal. And in a matter of minutes, I've gone from thinking it's all over back to dreaming about actually seeing Brisbane in a grand final. But the Lions still have plenty of footy to play. Carlton could very easily have put the foot on the throat and won the game by 35 points, but the charge went on. Joe, McKenna, Lester, Joe again. By half-time, all my first quarter therapy drinks had caught up to me and I was plastered. McCarthy kicked Brisbane's last 2 goals of the game, and just like that, Brisbane had come from 30-1 and had finally broken the dam and would go through to the grand final. Here's me, drunk as a skunk, reacting to the final siren. I feel so bad. I was hammered by this stage. I probably ruined everybody else's night. This is watching this footage is part of the reason why I don't really drink anymore.
14 fucking years!
Anyway, Brisbane would meet Collingwood in a rematch of the 02 and 03 grand finals. 20 years later, these rivals would meet again. I remember going down for this game and realizing how outnumbered Brisbane was. It was a little intimidating. Like, our players were getting booed during the parade. And the Pies supporters did a great job of creating a hostile atmosphere. Despite that though, it was a fun weekend. I wasn't going to let any foolishness stop me from just enjoying Brisbane playing in a grand final. I remember getting there super early and just enjoying the atmosphere and the peace of an empty, sunny MCG, reflecting on my 14 years as a Brisbane Lions supporter and all of the frustration and the pain, thinking about how in just 5 hours time, it might be worth it. The MCG filled up and it became very clear that it was about 70-30 Collingwood supporters, but we Lions supporters did have a number of people there, so it's tough being an interstate team, but we made a pretty good effort. Kiss performed, which was admittedly pretty incredible. And then the game got underway. I remember a lot about this game. I remember the Dacos duck for the first goal in the grand final. I remember having a great view of Zach Bailey's 2 first quarter goals. I remember having the thought of, wow, I just watched Brisbane kick a goal in the grand final. That's crazy. I was leaving to beat the piss line when a Collingwood fan yelled at me for leaving before De Goey could kick his quarter time goal after the siren. Brisbane ended up getting out in front for a little bit, not by a lot, but like 10-ish points roughly in the second quarter. And I remember sitting back and thinking, wow, this is possible. This might actually happen. Brisbane were doing some remarkable things, like genuinely playing out of their skin. Still, the grand final pressure was getting to some players. Collingwood just had an answer for everything. The third quarter was an arm wrestle. Dev Robertson, who had come in to replace Ashcroft and was doing a great job serving his role as a Will Ashcroft impersonator you hire off Facebook Marketplace for a birthday party, ended up kicking a goal and he put the Lions back in front. And then Collingwood got the lead right back. 3/4 time, the margin is 4 points. I had to get out and compose myself. I found myself on a smoker's balcony overlooking the footy festival And I remember dapping up some random Collingwood guy and wishing him luck for the final quarter. And then the fourth quarter came. It was a stalemate for most of the fourth quarter. And then out of nowhere, Charlie Cameron beats, I think, Braden Maynard, and the Lions are in front. And I just got up and I yelled. I didn't cheer. I just got up and I yelled. And it was the most emotional, visceral moment that I've ever experienced at the footy so far. There may have only been 30,000 Lions supporters in the building, but fuck, we were loud, bro. I sat down, I opened up my phone, and I saw that there was 5 minutes left, and I'm thinking about, oh shit, we got to hold on for 5 more minutes. We got to lock it down. And then I look up from my phone and I just see Jordan De Goey steaming towards his forward line. He kicks it from just outside 50 and the Pies are back in front immediately. Well, that was fun while it lasted. And then a few minutes later, Jared Berry, my poor guy. Jared Berry, bro, my poor guy. I felt so bad for him. I saved this from my old job, by the way. He was going to end up in the bin, but I saved him. And he got a very stiff 50. I know I'm biased, but I thought it was pretty stiff. Not incorrect necessarily, but just shit luck, I feel. Like if he was there a second or two earlier, I don't think the 50 gets paid, but poor guy. Let me put this back. How the fuck was he even sitting here? Okay. Where was I? Yeah, but anyway, as I was saying, I will never forget Sidebottom's goal, and then I will never ever forget the building shook. The concrete underneath my feet was shaking. If they kicked one more goal, my section might have collapsed, and I just remember sinking back into my chair, and the security guards were already going around the ground, and that's kind of like a signal for the game's almost over. And you just knew, like, Brisbane weren't going to get there. There just wasn't enough time. And I put my earbuds in and started playing Spotify just to distract myself, to try and escape reality. This video is turning into a therapy session. I apologize, but I just put my hat over my head, and the first song that started playing was The Spins by Mac Miller. Then I feel a commotion around me. I take my hat off. Joe's just marked it inside 50. And this is just an example of how Joe was a low-key genius. He immediately played on and kicked a goal, giving us 1 minute and 40 seconds to take the lead and win. But the game went on. Brisbane had an entry inside 50 and it came straight out. And I just knew, like, it was going to be an act of God to win this game. And God was not in this building on this day. I put my hat back on my head and my headphones back in. Mac Miller was still playing and the chorus was starting for The Spins by Mac Miller, and I can hear the siren in the background and the eruption of noise. I had to remove this song from my playlist eventually because, like, every time it would come up, I would just get flashbacks to September 30th, 2023. I stood up. I was still in shock when the final siren went, which I thought was strange because I knew what was going to happen for like a few minutes at least, but it still hit me. And then it sank in just how close we got, how we might not get another chance again to get this done, how this might be as close as we ever get to winning a flag. And I just started crying. There was a young family sitting in the row in front of me, and as they left, the Collingwood song was blaring through the speakers, and there was a gentleman from the Collingwood segment with his shirt off in the aisle going apeshit. And as the young boy in the family entered the aisle, I can still picture it. I can see his little face, little man in his Lions gear. He's got tears in his eyes. The gentleman with his shirt off in his celebration, he accidentally bumps into the kid as he's trying to leave. I remember the sheer startle on this boy's face as he looked up at the man. And let me be clear, it was a complete accident. Like, he didn't even know what he did. He didn't even realize he had accidentally bumped into this kid, and it wasn't enough to like knock him over or hurt him. It was just enough to like, ugh, shit. And I still remember that to this day. And I feel so bad for that kid. And I remember thinking like, wow, there is injustice in the world. Like, if that was the worst of it, like, the world would be pretty good. But so most of the Lions supporters in our section had left. I wanted to wait until Harris Andrews had his speech on the dais. I locked eyes with that same Collingwood fan with his shirt off, and I expected to get absolutely destroyed, but he stuck his hand out and shook my hand and congratulated me on a good game. And several other Collingwood fans in that section did that, and I've always appreciated that, you know. They have a reputation, some of it justified, but some of it is also unjustified. There are a few good ones out there. Anyway, Harris gave his speech, and I just remember walking down the stairs, bawling my eyes out. I could hear the medals being awarded over the loudspeaker as we were walking down the stairs. We got onto a tram. I realized what had happened with the advantage call, and one thing led to another, and I got my Twitter banned.
This is such bullshit. I'm so freaking pissed right now. This is bullshit. I am so pissed right now. God damn it.
So that was that. Chris Fagan and his Lions had reached what was the peak of their journey, and it had been snatched away when they had one hand on the cup. The next 6 months would be the most important in the club's modern history.
There's plenty of history around to say that you know, grand final losses don't have to define you or destroy you. They can make you. So that's what we'll be looking to do. You know, we just got to make sure we handle this loss well.
So I've been sitting here for like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and this is the longest video I've made, and this is also my first video in a long time. So I'm kind of like a re-baptism by fire type situation right now. I'm kind of struggling, but I'm at page 25 out of 42 pages, so we are closer to the end than the beginning. So let's keep going. Now, despite going through such a horrendous, heartbreaking, traumatic experience, it was a good time to be a Lions supporter. Our players were refreshed. Ashcroft was coming back this year, and the game against Carlton in the opening round was going exactly according to plan. The Lions were back. Last year's grand final heartbreak was going to be the kick in the pants that the boys needed to go one better.
Through the half-back one, but as you said, he's going to kick it.
Let's hope it's all okay, because he is a rising star.
There's your siren! For the first time in more than a decade, the Blues have beaten Brisbane in Brisbane. What a game of football.
As the siren sounds, Freo start with a flurry. A huge win over the Brisbane Lions.
Here we are, relief for Collingwood. They have ticked the W box for the first time in 2024.
Ah dear. And just like that, Brisbane went from being 46 points up, dreaming about the year ahead, to 0-3, and now Kitty Coleman has just done his ACL. The first half of the year was a massacre on the injury front. No less than 4 ACLs by the time the Gold Coast game had come and gone. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. After the Hawthorn loss, it seemed like the season was gone, and it seemed like 2023 Brisbane would be one of those teams that gets talked about as a good team that never won a premiership. Just a cautionary tale. But then they started winning. If there was a silver lining to the horrendous injury run, it was guys like Logan Morris and Bruce Reville getting their opportunities that they never would have gotten under any normal circumstances. It was a slow burn, but they kept building the momentum. One win after another. And after they beat Melbourne by 5 points at the Gabba, they were back in the 8, and it kept going. Brisbane really re-established itself against Sydney at the Gabba. Out of nowhere, they had come from 13th to 4th place. After one of the most remarkable, exciting games I've ever personally attended, they had won 7 games in a row. They would win 9 games in a row and were about to lock in a top 2 spot when they slipped at the end of the year, kicking themselves out of a win against GWS and letting a 30-point margin against Collingwood turn into another single-score loss at the MCG against Collingwood. But still, they finished top 8. They had a home final against Carlton, and despite being up 60-0, I still thought Brisbane were going to let another comeback happen, but I'm glad they eased off in hindsight, because the next week, the Lions would travel to Sydney to take on the Giants. This game has its own Wikipedia page that tells you everything you need to know about what happens next. This game deserves its own video, quite frankly. This is perhaps the most important game, the most consequential game that the Brisbane Lions have ever had post-lethal three-peat. After a spicy welcome to country, the half-empty NG Stadium got treated to a fairly even first quarter. GWS leading by 10 points. I got held up at quarter time trying to find some hot chocolate and donuts, but I didn't really miss much. GWS pushed their lead up to 21 points by halftime, and it got worse in the third quarter. The margin ballooned out to 44 points, 80-36, and then Kai Lohmann played on, sold some candy, and kicked Brisbane's first goal since the start of the second quarter. Then Oscar, Charlie, Bailey, and Zorko. Out of nowhere, the margin had gone from 44 points to 15 points. Our little pocket of Lions supporters was going apeshit, stomping on the steel floor our seats were sitting on. You couldn't hear it on the broadcast though, which sucks. But dude, it sounded so loud sitting there. But then the Giants recomposed themselves and kicked 2 goals in a row at the end of the third, getting it back out to 25 points. Something that was still very gettable for Brisbane, but by the start of the fourth, Toby Green kicked a goal to get the margin to 31 points with 1 quarter of footy to go. Perhaps a bridge too far. And then who else but Eric Hipwood got us going, followed by Charlie Cameron, and then nothing. A stalemate. It seemed like Brisbane were going to run out of time, and then Zorko did his best Ronaldo impression, and then Jasper,
Taylor pushed off it by Danaher. Deliberate.
and then Joe, one of the most maligned, criticized, slept on players in the modern era. He was infamous among Bombers supporters, laughed at by AFL experts and other fans. Lions fans either loved him or hated him. And now, here he is, with his team 7 points down, with 3 minutes and 45 seconds to go in the game, right on the boundary line. You know what happens next. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Joe Danaher experience.
Kick looks all right. Joe Danaher! Standing up in the big moments!
I don't care what anybody says, this man is a genius. All of a sudden, it's 3:20 on the clock, and the Giants forward 50. Enter Jared Berry. He hits up Rayner, it spills to Lohmann, and then there's Joseph goddamn Danaher by himself in the forward 50 with one of the better defenders in the game. The small little pocket of Lions supporters are going bananas. The Giants fans are slipping back into their seats. Joe Danaher is about to complete the greatest finals comeback in modern AFL history.
Can Joe slot it through? You bet he can! Brisbane in front!
2 anxiety-riddled, booty hole clenching minutes later, it was over. Brisbane was still alive. I accidentally punched a kid in the face when the final siren went, but he was okay, I promise you. You can see me apologize to him afterwards in this footage.
I got the grass. I got the grass from Joey's pocket.
Joe Danaher also starred, kicking 4 goals, including the match winner. One cash-hungry fan has even put the sod from the forward's boot on eBay.
I'm like, what did he say fuck me for?
Now, Brisbane would have Geelong at the MCG in the prelim final. Only 2 years previous, they had been embarrassed by Geelong. Brisbane still had a reputation at the MCG. Not as bad as it once was, but that Collingwood choke was still in everybody's minds. This final series deserves its own video, man. It was unbelievable. I remember how nervous I was for this game. I didn't watch it with my family. I didn't go out. I locked myself in this room and watched it on KO on this monitor right here that you can't see. And I just couldn't face the world on this day. I don't expect that to sound normal, but I was just so nervous. The first quarter was kind of bizarre. Geelong kicked 4 behinds in a row, and with the amount of inside 50s they were getting, it seemed like it was going to be a repeat of 2022. But then, all of a sudden, Charlie Cameron marked the ball in bounds, and he kicked the first goal of the game. For Brisbane, no less. Brisbane was standing up. Geelong kicked their first, and Brisbane answered back straight away. This is remarkable. After the grueling semi-final, Brisbane looked as fresh as a daisy. Eric kicked Brisbane's second goal in a row. Bro, we were 10 points up in the first. Everything's going amazing. But then Oscar.
McInerney's done his shoulder. He has popped his shoulder, Oscar McInerney.
Oscar did his shoulder. Brisbane lost their ruckman in the first quarter. The commentators were saying it was a turning point, but, initially Brisbane were doing okay. Geelong only kicked 1 goal in the first quarter, kicking themselves out of a quarter-time lead. And Oscar, despite suffering one of the most painful mindfucks of an injury that you can suffer, was back with his shoulder partially mummified. Geelong woke up though, like everyone said they would. It had flipped to an 11-point Geelong margin, but then Brisbane came back and scores were level by the 8-minute mark. Then Brian Myers broke the deadlock, and this was the start of the blue and white tsunami. Geelong kept piling on, and it looked like Brisbane had run out of puff. They had used up all of their magic the week prior. Geelong were not going to be denied. Paddy Dangerfield kicked the easiest of goals, and it was a 25-point margin in the third. I had muted the commentary on my KO at this point because I thought we had lost, and I couldn't bear to listen to the commentators glazing Geelong. And then Calamar Chi, who was having a career best year, crumbed it and gold to get the margin back to 19. Brisbane went coast to coast with one of the most insane passages I've seen. Charlie goals, 14 points. Just then, Oscar's finished off what's left of his shoulder, and the shot of Oscar on the stretcher going into the ambulance was one of the most haunting, distressing things that I've seen. Of all the players to get injured right before a potential grand final, anybody but the Big O. Come on, man. But the show must go on. Lohmann kicked Brisbane's third goal in a row, and the margin is now 8 points. Blitzarv's goals, and it's back to 14. And then another insane passage ends up in the hands of the number 1 pick, Cam Rayner. After a few minutes of stalemate, the margin was briefly reduced to 2 points until the Arc stepped in. Finally, Zach Bailey stood up and the margin was reduced to a point. A rush behind and the scores were level. 2 weeks in a row, Brisbane have had to mount a finals comeback, and now they were one good quarter of footy away from a second grand final in a row. Breathe. What happened next capped off one of the greatest finals you will ever see. Neither side could fire a shot for the first 6 minutes. 2 Geelong behinds leveled the score. With 12 minutes to go, it was still level. All of a sudden, Charlie found Calamar Chi and Brisbane were in front by a goal with 11:14 to go. Less than a minute of game time later, Brisbane were up by 2 goals. Brisbane are 10 minutes and 29 seconds away from beating Geelong in Melbourne for the first time since the 2004 prelim. But Geelong weren't done yet. They had plenty of opportunities, including Joe almost committing the worst blunder in AFL history, but he got there just in time.
Joe Danaher in the nick of time. Oh my goodness me.
Geelong just couldn't convert. Brisbane was standing up, but 10 minutes is a long time in footy. Now all of a sudden, Kai Lohmann has the chance to put Brisbane up by 17 points with 7 minutes to go, but it was wide right. 12 points with 7 to go, and Geelong took it down the other end immediately and reduced it to 6 points. I remember the sheer dread in the pit of my stomach. We saw this a few weeks ago with Collingwood, but the consequences were on a whole new level of dire. Geelong went forward again. Jeremy Cameron, with a chance to level the score, kicks a point. 5 minutes to go. My hands were shaking. I was pacing all around this very room, but then Rayner takes one of the great hangers with 3 minutes to go. He hits Bailey up. He's running forward.
Moment in a prelim. Bailey caught by Stewart. No way are you doing that on my watch. A chance for close to Cameron, to Henry. Henry snaps. Henry goals.
I still feel sick when I watch it. Even after we won, I still feel like shit whenever I watch it. It was at this moment I thought Brisbane were cursed. 4 points in a grand final, 1 year later, 1 point in a prelim. What the fuck, dude? It was stoppage after stoppage. Meanwhile, downstairs, my family are watching on Channel 7. Anyone familiar with KO, it's on a 30-second delay. Now, this ball up right here, my audio is still muted because I can't bear to listen to the commentators announce Geelong making the 2024 grand final. And then all of a sudden, I hear a commotion from downstairs. It's my mum and she's screaming. So in my mind, 2 things are happening. 1, there's a home invasion and I'm about to get shot in the neck. Or 2, something happens in the game. Something enough to make my mum scream. I was waiting for Neil, Dunkley, Berry, Ashcroft, McCluggage, Bailey, one of our stars to stand up. And then Joe smothers Atkins's kick. And it was none of the men I mentioned, but Noah Answorth, who steamed forward and bombed it forward. Cameron can't manufacture a mark. He gets clobbered, and just like he has multiple times this year, Archie kicks a goal and the Lions are back in front. And I still remember seeing the goal live. I still remember the sheer euphoria rush back up my body. Like, it started in my legs and it just rose up to my heart and my neck and my head. And it was amazing, dude. It was a bad night to be Chris Fagan's chewing gum. There was still heaps of time for the Cats. Enter Will Ashcroft. He intercepts. He gives it to Eric. Eric hits the don't argue, which is one of the most insane things I've written in a script for a video. Rayner collects it from outside 50 on the left boot. He kicks the Lions into the granny. From the shithouse to the penthouse in a matter of minutes. At this point, I've run downstairs to celebrate with my family. I missed Payne's rundown tackle, which sucks, but as I'm hugging my family, I look over at the TV and there's a free kick for Geelong directly in front almost, and my heart just sank. I knew it was too good to be true. There was still heaps of time for one more goal, still heaps of time for the Geelong miracle.
Geelong, got to go back and kick it. Reece Stanley hits the post. That might be your game right there. 26 seconds. Those that were here will never forget what they saw. Brisbane just had unfinished business to attend to at the MCG, and they will get their chance next week against the Sydney Swans.
It's something I read ages ago. If you're going to walk on thin ice, you might as well dance. I thought, I just might try that theme with the boys, and I didn't know whether it worked or not with them. And I was probably talking to myself a little bit too, because you can become a little bit conservative and try too hard as a coach when things aren't going well. So I probably wanted to release the shackles on myself a little bit. So
from 44 points down in the semi-final to another grand final, I don't think we'll see anything like it for a while. The grand final weekend was the opposite of the previous year. It was relaxed, it was peaceful. And it was peaceful and relaxing for the Lions players as well. Brisbane weren't walking into the hood repping the wrong gang colours this year. This was two interstate teams for the first time since 2006, and it was such a great atmosphere, man. The Lions players looked relaxed but confident, composed but determined. Everyone was tipping Sydney, but surely Brisbane were going to have something to say about that. I was really sick this year though. Like, I had a horrible sinus infection. My nose was blocked and I'd left my nasal spray in the hotel. But it didn't ruin my mood. I did the same thing as I did last year. I got there super early and just sat there and watched the MCG fill up. Katy Perry killed it, and just like that, the 2024 grand final got underway. And Sydney kicked the first two goals, just like last year. And I was like, wow, it's going to be one of those days again. But then Brisbane answered back with 4 goals in the first quarter.
A 4-goal to 3-goal first quarter for the Lions.
I was expecting to see a repeat of that classic game at the Gabba earlier in the year where we barely won against Sydney. And for the first half of the second term, it seemed to be heading in that direction. 9 minutes to go in the second quarter. It's an 11-point margin. Joe Danaher, who had lit up the footy world with retirement rumours the night before, put the Lions up by 17 points. Nobody knew it at the time, but this was the beginning of the end. Brisbane kicked 5 goals in a row. Jarryd Berry got his grand final moment on the same side of the ground as that harsh 50 the year prior. Eric Kipwood did his best Ackermanis impersonation. Logan Morris and Archie hit the scoreboard as well. And before anybody could catch their breath, the margin was 46 points. It's half time and I've left the MCG. I was outside walking around the footy festival because I was in complete shock. I was also trying to find an open pharmacy because my nose was getting worse. I remember hearing the Channel 7 broadcast on the loudspeakers, and I can still hear it now. Bruce McAvaney saying something to the effect of this being the biggest halftime margin since Geelong did that number on Port Adelaide in 2007. And when he said that, I realised how close we were. But Brisbane were 46 points in front against Carlton, and they let it slip. Brisbane were in front of Collingwood by 30, and they let it slip. Brisbane's season and last couple of years, quite frankly, were littered with these types of games. And I just thought to myself, is this it? Or is this too good to be true? Are we about to win a premiership? Or are we about to become an AFL campfire story? Losing the biggest lead in grand final history to Sydney. There was still plenty of time. People were already going the early crow, and I hate that shit. Nevertheless, I returned to my seat, and it was a slow start to the game. Then Archie goaled, and I thought, okay, good. The higher the margin, the more clock we eat up, the less likely we are to choke. Then Heaney kicked a goal, and I thought, ugh, that could get them going. And then Will kicked a goal, and I thought, oh shit, we might have this. And then I can still see it now. I almost missed it because there was a cop walking in front of me.
Officer, move, please.
This was when I knew. This was when I knew we were going to win a premiership. From 44 points down in the semi to being up by 60 in the grand final, with the premiership won before the third quarter had even finished. I just started crying and I didn't stop. I remember being a complete mess at 3/4 time, crying my eyes out. I got hugged by this random Lions supporter in the stairs. We took a selfie together. He didn't even know about me and what I do for a hobby. He had no idea who I was. I was just another Lions supporter to him. But I was crying into this random dude, and it was just like 15 years of pain, heartbreak, and misery. My whole life up to this point as a Lions supporter, it had been one traumatic experience after another, but not anymore. Not today. The fourth quarter was just a blur. Sydney kicked a couple of goals to recover the margin. I remember racing a few people down to the fence before the final siren, and I didn't get a good look at it, but I saw it on the big screen.
Bailey to Danaher. Danaher, the final stamp on the day. Joe Danaher. Look at them get around this man here. Wonder what that means.
The Joe Danaher experience was now complete.
And that'll be it. From walking on thin ice to dancing on the mountaintop, the Brisbane Lions never stopped believing. Chris Fagan and his Lions win it all in 2024.
Come on, Eric! Joey!
By the time we made it out of the MCG, I had a bag full of premiership posters. I was desperate not to lose. My nose was completely blocked. I couldn't breathe, and I could feel it was red raw. We were fortunate enough to get into the Lions after party. I could see Joe Danaher. I didn't get to meet him, but he was still in his full playing kit, like socks and all. And the function was right next to the MCG, and all the lights were still on. I remember leaving the function and looking at this empty, silent, bright MCG and thinking about how good life was, how blessed I was to have this experience, and how excited I was for 2025.
The team manager said, AFL said to give you this is a premiership medal. And I said, but I've already got a medal. I don't need 2 medals. I don't need any medals. On the Thursday in our team meeting, I pulled it out of my pocket and I said, somewhere or other this fell off the back of the truck. It's a premiership medal, and I reckon there's one bloke in this room that should get a medal because we know that he would have played if he had been fit. So, Oscar, this is for you, mate.
He said, this one's fallen off the back of a truck. No worries, make extra, here you go. It wasn't until December I actually found out he's giving me his.
It was a nice little off-season for Brisbane, actually. We drafted Levi Ashcroft, Ty Gallup, and Sam Marshall. Brisbane still had every piece of the puzzle to mount another run at the flag. Plus, Kitty Coleman, Lincoln McCarthy, Darcy Gardner, Tom Duday, and Bruce Reville were all coming back from injury. So, things were looking up. This year, it was a good year. Jesus Christ, back-to-back premierships has got to count for something, but it was a little bit cursed, and I'll tell you why. 2024 was just injuries everywhere. And you'd think Brisbane would get a little bit of relief on that front, but arguably it got worse in 2025. Right before the season had even begun, Brandon Starcevich was assassinated by the Adelaide Crows in a practice match. The opening round match was postponed because of a cyclone, and tragically, Lincoln McCarthy would re-injure his ACL right before round 1 at some point between his return in the practice match and his expected return during the regular season. Speaking of that round 1 game, a grand final rematch with Brisbane winning by just 4 points. In one game, Kai Lohmann sprained his ankle, Starks got concussed again, and then Charlie Cameron didn't even make the game. He was out with calf soreness before the game even begun. Despite all of that, things are trucking along relatively smoothly. Brisbane began to make a habit of getting really far back on the scoreboard and then having to fight their way back. They did it at the flag unveiling against the West Coast in Darcy Gardner's return, again against Geelong, and famously against the Bulldogs at Gabba Round, or as Lion fans like to call it, the Eric Hipwood legacy game, where Eric led a 39-point comeback and turned the deficit into a 21-point win. Kind of a worrying trend, but Brisbane are up 5-0 and on top of the ladder. So, you know, things are good. And then our close personal friends Collingwood brought us back down to earth at the Gabba. The days of Gabba being a stronghold were long gone. Gabba games are now very gettable. Plus, Bruce did his hamstring and he was out again. And then Brisbane played North Melbourne in one of the draws of all time. On the bright side, Bruce is back, and in even bigger news, Kitty Coleman is back. And then Brisbane took this amazing, uplifting news and then lost to the AFL's equivalent of Boston Shaquille O'Neal, the 2025 Melbourne Demons.
You light my fire.
And then like a fart in the wind, Kitty was gone again. While this was all happening, Oscar McInerney was battling through various injuries. He's going to bounce in and out for most of the year. Meanwhile, Kitty would injure his quad, and for one reason or another, he wouldn't get back on the track this year. Poor guy couldn't catch a break. On the bright side, Jared Berry returned from concussion and proved handy in their breakthrough win against Hawthorn at the MCG. Darcy Gardner was out for the Adelaide game with knee soreness, which made way for another significant debut, Ty Gallop. But then the next week against the Giants came another critical knee injury, Jack Payne. All is not lost though. Brisbane came to Geelong and spoiled the bizarre whiteout party where they handed out white t-shirts for everybody to wear. Everyone was freaking out about how awesome this was, but it didn't really work. In fact, all it did was make Brisbane fans stick out more in the crowd. Plus, you kind of lose all your aura when you get pumped by 41 points at home for the first time in 22 years. So that was fun. You know what's nuts? Brisbane got their first bye of the year in round 16. Like, people don't realize how fucked up their fixture was. Obviously, I wouldn't accuse the AFL of trying to sabotage Brisbane. Not in this day and age anyway. But this is as close to the AFL standing in the way of a footy club as you'll ever get. Archie and Gardner came back for the win against the Power, and after several games in the VFL, the Big O made his return. The poor son of a bitch was really going through it though. He was injured pretty much all season. By the time the grand final came around, he had to have been on like 1 HP, kept standing up with injections and whatever's in the Call of Duty Pack-a-Punch. Meanwhile, as all of this was happening, Lincoln McCarthy was trying to speedrun his ACL recovery to get back for finals, which is insane. Like, that doesn't happen at all, ever. Like, I don't know how he expected to make this happen, but it involved a graft from his patella tendon rather than the traditional method of going through the hamstring tendon. Sam Doherty did something similar the year prior, accelerating the process somehow and getting back just in time for the elimination final. Just to put it in perspective, he injured his ACL in the same game as Kitty Coleman. And Kitty Coleman's still not even back yet. So eventually though, Link came to his senses and stopped his push to give it just enough time to heal properly. I suspect, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but Brisbane may have known that Archie was going to Adelaide, so they would have to have McCarthy to fall back on as a replacement, and they didn't want to jeopardize his health by rushing him back before he was ready. Now, despite the hardest draw in, at the very least, modern history, and about several paragraphs worth of injury concerns, Brisbane are still in the top two, only 2 points behind Collingwood. And also Adelaide's here. Good for them. Brisbane's had pretty much everything thrown at them. It's been a properly cursed year, and they're still going until round 20. Gold Coast just tore the Lions apart, and then this was when people began to believe that the hard fixture and the injuries and a few shortened pre-seasons in a row were going to start taking their toll, because it was only going to get harder from here. Collingwood at the MCG, a nice break against Sydney, who were in their post-grand final slump, Fremantle at Optus, and Hawthorn at home. 3 very, very hard games and a winnable game at home. How did the end of the year pan out? Well, Brisbane beat Collingwood, which was nuts considering it was at the MCG. Kai Lohmann had strained his calf and Brisbane had been diddied by Gold Coast the previous week. And somehow Brisbane were able to win this game and go undefeated at the MCG during the home and away season. Then Brisbane got upset by Sydney at home. Then went to Perth and sank the Fremantle ship and rounded out the year by beating a red-hot Hawthorn. So they won all the hard ones and lost the easy one. That sounds like 2025 Brisbane. Through this run of final games, if you can believe it, Brisbane had even more injuries. Crucially to Jared Berry, who dislocated his shoulder in Perth, and Lachie Neale, who would tear his quad and miss the rest of the home and away season. Now, thanks to the pre-finals bye and the timing of these injuries, both men were able to return for the upcoming finals run to try and go back to back. So after one of the hardest home and away seasons that one could potentially dream up, Brisbane have finished third on the ladder and would go to Melbourne to face Geelong at the MCG. Last time Brisbane played in a final against Geelong, it was pretty extraordinary. So, you know, expectations are pretty...
Berry on the fly, but there it is. The Geelong Football Club march into their 14th prelim.
Oh dear. Well, that's not good.
Yeah, that's a calf, I reckon.
Just watching Lachie Neale behind play, guys, it's almost like he's in denial. That right calf, you saw him grab at it straight away. He's missed the last 3 games with that quad injury. This is a massive story developing as you can see him come from the ground right now.
That's even worse.
Torn ACL is wild. He's got an absolute dog in him running around. To play with a partially torn ACL and a calf, and we all thought, you know what, Eric Hipwood, he'll get back to form. He's got a calf injury. Maybe that's why his body's not right. He'll get back to form. He'll find his form. No wonder he couldn't. Torn ACL. And he didn't even know about it. How long has he been playing with it for? I mean, it just gets from bad to worse for the Lions.
Well, it just might be over, actually. So yeah, not even old Eric Hipwood was safe from the injury pandemic sweeping through the Brisbane Lions list. It turns out while everyone else was slowly going down with injuries, he played 16 games with a partially torn ACL. So to do some quick math, that tells me he was injured in the Bulldogs Gab-Around game, the Eric Hipwood legacy game. That performance was so insane that it blew up Eric's ACL partially. Anyone who criticizes this man ever again, I hope your house blows up. Anyway, Neale is out for the season. Fuck. Now Brisbane are playing Gold Coast in the semi, who are coming off their greatest win in their club's history. It's the first finals Q clash, and that's awesome for Queensland footy. It's an important achievement. It's awesome to see Gold Coast finally seeing some finals footy, and successful finals footy, mind you. But if Gold Coast were to beat us on this night, sending my Lions out in straight sets for the 3rd time, I'd simply have to walk into the sea. Luckily, that didn't happen. Brisbane did what they had to do, and through the grace of God, there were no injuries coming out of this game. So, onto Collingwood at the MCG for the prelim. But during the post-match broadcast, Lachie Neale is getting interviewed, and he says this.
What chances, Lachie? I heard you on Triple M earlier today, I think it was, but you've got a couple of weeks if you do happen to make the grand final. What do you really think?
Yeah, well, I think I can get there, but there's a lot of people that don't.
So this is normally, what, a four-week injury?
Yeah, I think it's sort of 5 to 6 maybe, but yeah, there's a lot on the line, so I'll push as hard as I can, but no guarantees. But yeah, regardless, it'll set myself up for a really strong off-season if I don't get there. But the boys have got to get the job done next week as well, so we'll see how we go.
But Lachie, the Q-Scan injury update said you were out for the rest of the season. Do you think Q-Scan would lie to me like that? It must be said, it's a long shot, you know, like who are you going to omit from the side for Lachie Neale on one leg? Meanwhile, Brisbane are back at the MCG, this time facing Collingwood. Pies are everybody's tip for this game, and I must admit, I have my doubts. Perhaps there'd be one too many injuries to key personnel for Brisbane to overcome. Funny story, my local footy club's awards night was on at the same time as this game. I don't know why, but as I was driving to the function, the game had just started. I know last year I was so nervous I had to lock myself in my room, but this year I was still very anxious. But I guess having won one already, it wasn't as bad. I kind of liked going to this function. It gave me a distraction, if that makes sense. I almost drove my car off a bridge when I heard Mason Cox kick a goal off a free kick. If my memory serves me correctly, because I was listening to the broadcast as I was driving there. As I was parking my car, Scott Pendlebury had just been subbed out, and when I heard it, I almost crashed into somebody's parked car, dude. I couldn't believe it. By the time I got into the bar, Brisbane had already kicked their first goal. By the time I sat down for the awards night, Ty Gallop had just put the Lions up by 19 points. But as the presentation went on, Collingwood fought back, and I thought, well, you know, too good to be true. But hey, with everything that's happened this year, a prelim is a solid effort. The comp's just too even these days to let back-to-back happen. Then the 3rd quarter started, and there was a TV just behind me with the game on. Everyone had TVs with the game on either next to them or behind them. So as the awards night is happening, like Brisbane's just come back and got the lead back, and everyone's stopped paying attention to the awards night, and we're just like, It got to a point where they literally had to stop the presentation until the game was over. Nobody was paying attention. I was free to stop twisting my neck around like this and pay attention to the reality of the situation. Brisbane were back in front and they were playing well. Like really well. It looked like round one where they were fresh as a daisy. When Will Ashcroft kicked that goal, you know the one I'm talking about. I was like, shit, this might happen. Then the fourth quarter started and Collingwood kicked a goal and I just started to feel sick. But then Collingwood got too cute and undid themselves with an ill-fated inside 50. One superbly umpired passage of play later, Brisbane got a turnover. John Ralph was later mogged to death on national television by Jonathan Brown for whining about this moment.
The umpiring department will assess it, and I'd imagine by very early tomorrow morning we'll get a decision that this is a blatant error. No eyes on the ball. He takes Elliott's left arm.
You got to pull up on that day. Eyes on the ball,
and he takes his body.
You're saying he didn't have eyes on the ball?
He didn't have eyes on the ball.
What do you mean? Hang on, play that again, Ralph. He put your glasses on.
He takes his left arm.
Look at his eyes.
He takes his body.
He's clearly got his eyes on the ball there.
Yeah, and that's fine.
This is a blatant free kick. This is not something else I should be doing in the context of it. So 12 points down. It would have gone back to 6 points with 9 minutes left. So much time.
So just on this so quickly now, yes, it's 50-50 call. So, but you've said two things that you've seen or you think you've seen, but actually the vision doesn't show that. He had eyes on the ball and he didn't drag his arm down like you said. So
he chops the arm.
I don't think he even chops the arm, but to the outside world.
Well, that was one of the worst frame moggings I've ever seen.
And then Ty Gallop outmaneuvers and outruns Jeremy Howe, and this fucking kick was so good, bro. I almost fainted in the function room when I saw this. One Charlie goal later, the Lions are up by 18 points, and then if our little corner of Lion supporters wasn't making enough noise, here comes Ty Gallop in game number 5 against a premiership backline, taking a big contested mark like he's Alistair Lynch. When Lohman was doing push-ups on the Collingwood cheer squad, I couldn't believe my eyes. And then, as if it couldn't get any better, here comes Zorko to do dances on the grave. The Brisbane Lions are into their 3rd consecutive grand final. Even though it's already happened, it's a struggle to comprehend that sentence as I wrote it down. Like growing up as a Lions fan, it was all pain and misery. To go from expecting disappointment to being spoiled with this remarkable run, it's amazing. I actually vlogged the whole weekend with my older camera. It's like 10 years old, so it's not the best footage, but the camera I'm using right now cost me way too much money and I didn't want to break it because if I did, I'd be fucked for videos like this. Regardless, it's still a pretty good video. You should go watch it after this. We came in Thursday night after I finished my shitty job that was ruining my life. A security guard attacked my camera during the parade.
Are you on a ledge, mate? You are, just I need you on the ground level. On the ground? Sorry, mate.
It's my team. That's all.
Dangerfield let go of the cup first. Lockie, on the other hand, couldn't put down the cup.
I can't put down the cup. I can't put down the cup. I can't put down.
Now you're probably thinking to yourself, what the heck? How is Lockie on the stage? How is he even playing? Well, meanwhile, in the Lions injury room, both Lockie Neal and Jared Berry, who had dislocated his shoulder again in the prelim, were pushing to get fit for the granny. Now, Jared was a long shot, but Lockie was training, and not only training, but training well and hard. He was put through various fitness tests that would make Nigel Lappin's eyes water, and they couldn't break his calf. They couldn't stop him. My understanding is that Lockie Neal was living full-time in a hyperbaric chamber, like a boy in the bubble type situation. On Friday, it was official. Jared took himself out of selection. Enter Lockie Neal. The question is, where do they start him? Do they start him on the field, on the bench? God forbid start him as the sub? Brisbane were keeping their cards close to their chest. We wouldn't know until the day of the game. People were freaking out, including a lot of the Brisbane supporter base. The Volcano called it one of the most reckless selection calls of all time, and I didn't entirely disagree. We've seen teams take injured players into grand finals before, and it's been a disaster. Sydney did it in 2022. They ran it back in 2024. GWS did it in 2019. Hell, that happened with Collingwood in the prelim, with Pendlebury getting subbed out after 4 minutes. and that's what everyone was afraid of. It was incredibly risky. Fags himself said he was going to be either looked at as a total idiot or a total genius. You seldom get to a grand final, or 3 in a row for that matter, unscathed. These risks happen, and they're not uncommon. All the general public, and for that matter Geelong themselves, could do was wait. Meanwhile, grand final eve was going amazing despite a little bit of rain, and the Lions open training was packed. It was insane. Like, we took over half of level 1, it looked like. It was incredible. Saturday morning, it was official. Lachie Neale was the sub. Brisbane had passed the point of no return. Now the plan of attack was, have Lachie Neale as the sub, start Sam Marshall instead of him, pray to God nobody gets injured in the first half of the game, pray to God that it's tight, or at the very least a winnable game by half time, and then pray to God that Lachie doesn't immediately break down at the start of the second half. You know, easy. Anyway, us Lions fans are beginning to get a bit spoiled at this point. It was the same ritual I had from the last 2 years. Get there early and watch the stadium fill up. I got to watch the Rising Stars game. Like, that's how early we were. Bruce was aura farming with the Premiership Cup, and as the stadium filled up, that meant we were getting closer to reaching either history or pain, and there wasn't a damn thing I could personally do to change what happened next. As weird as it sounds, there was still no nerves. Like, the last couple prelims, nerve city. I'm a nervous wreck. But the grand final weekend is such a massive occasion, you can't help but be enamored with the whole experience. Sure, losing 2023 hurt, but that was still a weekend I look back on and love, simply because of how long us Lions fans had been waiting to get back and experience it. You know, 24 and 25 kind of came out of nowhere, so I was just walking around Melbourne in a state of disbelief. Snoop Dogg came out and tore down the house, then the team ran out, and oh god, it's getting real. Rayner got booed out of the building for the events that occurred in the qualifying final. There was a super loud pocket of Brisbane fans in the sun, and I was kind of jealous and wanted to be a part of it, but I also enjoyed my time in the shade. And then, before you know it...
And we are underway. Perfect bounce. Stanley, a little piece of it.
Now, it was a slog of a first quarter, especially if your name is Zach Bailey, who kicked 4 behinds in the first quarter. He probably could have been Norm Smith if he had better luck in front of the sticks. Brisbane ended up kicking 1 goal 5, with Geelong sitting pretty with a respectable 2 goals free. This reeked of the Bris behinds bullshit that's plagued the Lions, not just for the last couple years. This has been a generational thing throughout the last 29 years. But Brisbane didn't panic. Even after Geelong scored the first 7 points of the quarter, Brisbane kicked 3 goals in a row. To get out to a 7-point lead. The second best Neale got it back to 1 point, but Levi answered immediately. This was his 27th game, by the way. God bless the father-son rule. Scores were level at halftime, for the first time in a grand final since 1909. It was a complete opposite to the year previous, and part of me was enjoying the spectacle, but still very nervous. As this was all happening, Lachie Neale was sitting on the bench, very restless, and looking very eager to get on the ground. Now, if you recall, the plan with Lachie was have him start as a sub, start Sam Marshall on the ground instead of him, pray to God that nobody gets injured in the first half, pray to God that it's a tight game, and then pray to God that Lachie doesn't immediately break down within minutes of coming on as a sub. Now, up to this point, the plan had gone okay. Sam Marshall was a little quiet, but keep in mind, this was a 19-year-old child in his 11th AFL game. I challenge you, anybody watching at home, to do better in his circumstances in a grand final in front of 100,000 people. Anyway, step 2, pray to God nobody gets injured early. Another tick. We had a few close calls, but we've gotten through okay. Step 3, pray to God that it's a tight game or a gettable margin. And scores a level, so that's another step of the plan crossed off. So now we have reached endgame. It is time for Lachie to come onto the ground. We are at step 4. Pray to God that Lachie doesn't break down immediately. I remember seeing the notification on my phone that Lachie was coming in for the third quarter. If I wasn't already pooping, I would have shat myself. But there was no better time to do it. Not to discount Brisbane's effort up to that point. I mean, Darcy Gardner had kept Jeremy Cameron goalless up to half time. But boy, Lachie Neale coming on in the third quarter was very welcome. Now, initially, he did look a little bit lost out there. His first touch came after 4 minutes of game time, but to be fair, it was kind of a rough start to the quarter for both sides, neither being able to get on the scoreboard until the better Bailey on the ground And in life, Zach finally broke through for his first goal. It was a lot of basketball footy, back and forth, neither team getting any points on the board. And then Jeremy Cameron broke his arm, chasing down Jasper Fletcher, which gave Geelong their first goal of the second half. Lockie went back onto the bench for a little bit of a breather, and he was back on at the 6:30 mark of the third quarter. Now that we've reached this stage, he hasn't broken down. In fact, he's gotten better as the quarter went on. We've unlocked the bonus step of the Lockie Neal plan. Hope like hell one of the other players doesn't go down with an injury now that the sub's been activated, meaning that we be a man down. God fucking damn it. God damn it, bro. Poor Stas, man. He had been amazing all day. He contained Dangerfield after that crazy prelim performance. He's done everything right, and now he's concussed again. Meanwhile, Geelong have just self-destructed a set shot opportunity and got nothing out of it. More contested footy with no scoring. It was a 1-point margin to Brisbane until the 4-minute 20 mark of the third, when Charlie Cameron marked inside 50 and scored. 2 minutes later, two Geelong defenders fisted it to Kai Lohmann, who hit up Charlie, who kicked his third goal. Brisbane are up by 13 points. As John Denver was reverberating around the MCG, I said to myself, I'm going to go beat the bathroom queue. See, the way the game had been going up to that point, goals were kind of rare, I thought there's probably not much left in the third quarter. I'm going to go to the toilet now and mentally prepare myself for the last quarter, just like I did in 2023. Now I'm in the toilet. I'm the only person in there. I'm at the urinal, and I all of a sudden just hear this noise, this eruption of sound. It felt like the men's room was shaking, and I'm thinking that's either really, really good or really, really bad. I got out of the bathroom and I'm frantically searching for one of those little TVs to check the score, and just then I catch Kai Lohmann lining up for his big barrel after the siren, and it's 19 points. And I thought, oh cool, we kicked a goal. I look back around, there's Lion fans coming from the seating, cheering, high-fiving, celebrating, and I had to resist the urge to give these people a dressing down. Like, I hate the early crow. You don't celebrate early, you never act like you've won until you've won. 19 points with a full quarter of footy to play is very gettable. I was nervous, but I didn't see what they saw. I didn't get to see Zorko cutting off Bailey Smith, hitting up Lockie, and Lockie kicking a monster goal from just outside 50. That iconic shot of him celebrating after, I missed all that. I've been present for some remarkable moments in Lions history, but I missed Lockie's goal, and that still irritates me. In hindsight, these people had every right to celebrate. This was it. This was the moment it began to turn from a tight 50-50 contest to an avalanche. But let's rewind. I didn't notice. I only saw Lockie's goal after the game. So I'm sitting back in my seat and I'm nervous. I'm scared to death.
I'm going to throw up.
Either the best or the worst thing is about to occur. Either back to back, or the front page of the paper tomorrow is going to read Lions choke. And then here comes our number one pick steaming out a half forward, melting blitzarves. And about 40 seconds later, the margin was 25 points. But then Geelong answered right back, and it's 21 points with a pretty much full quarter to play out. Still very gettable. A few minutes later, Geelong's backline has shat themselves right in front of goal, as if it couldn't get any more mortifying for Geelong. Of all people, the man who rage baited the entire footy world just a few weeks ago, Cam Rayner, kickstarts Geelong's death spiral. At this point, me sitting in the stands, I was in shock. From a 1-point margin to 27 points in front in only a few minutes of game time. But there's still 15 minutes and 33 seconds to go. Anything and everything is possible in the AFL world. Just to put it in perspective, the margin at the 15-minute and 33 mark of the GWS versus Brisbane semi-final was 24 points, and we all know how that ended. I've seen it with my own eyes. The game is not over. But then...
Here's Neal again. Off to Ashcroft. No way. What is going on?
Just like the Rayner mark in the third quarter of last year, you just knew. They've done it. They had no business doing it when you look at the injuries, the fixture, the quality of opponent, everything, but they did it anyway. From that moment, it was like a training drill. Nothing Geelong did could stop them. It was remarkable, better than the year previous. Geelong played well on this day. They were very competitive up until the end of the third quarter. It was a good game to watch. There was no tears this year from me. I just sat there in awe and shock as Brisbane buried the Cats.
Hard to imagine that 25 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, this game was tight. And now the Lions have busted.
The best thing about the Lions' performance on this day was that it was a total uniform team performance. It wasn't just a few people carrying the team on their back. It was a genuine toss-up of who could win the norm.
Does he win the Norm Smith medal, Kane? Harris Andrews.
He's been great. I think he's in the conversation.
What about him?
Well, he's in the conversation as well. I think Fletcher and Ashcroft.
What about him?
They're the 3 or 4 for me, I reckon.
What about him?
Yeah, he's been good, particularly in the second half, BT. Tough decision.
What about him?
For the judges.
Rayner 8 Bailey Smith one more time for good measure, which was just, you know, like that 2021 semi, bro. Rayner watched on in the stands with his ACL and, you know, just justice. This was justice. You know what's insane as well? The margin at one point blew out to 64. This was worse than last year. And they did it pretty much in the fourth quarter. But you know, you can't have everything in life, I guess. Brisbane were too busy celebrating to notice Geelong kicking a couple consolation goals to get it back to a slightly better 47 points.
Chris Fagan and his team have once again conquered footy's Everest. The Brisbane Lions will win back-to-back AFL premierships. Amazing scenes. Brisbane get it done. 47-point victors.
Chris Fagan's second masterpiece was complete. The gamble had paid off. Brisbane are back-to-back premiers. From 44 points down to back-to-back premiers. It's remarkable. It's still hard to comprehend as I write the script. I don't think we'll see a premiership run like this again. Play 28 total games in 1 year. Everybody's injured. 4 finals. Come in as considerable underdogs and just demolish the opponent. And they did it twice. Just insanity. I remember walking around Melbourne in a complete dream, wearing my Lions jumper with pride and thinking, wow, life's pretty good actually. I really needed it at that time in my life, man. It came at just the right time. No matter what Brisbane do after all of this, no matter what Brisbane do after all of these players have retired, after Fagan goes to coach Tasmania, after everything, no matter what happens to the Lions, if they merge with the Northern Territory expansion team in 2096, it doesn't matter what. They will be remembered forever. Next year, who knows what will happen. We've had a few key departures. Cal Archie, Brendan Starcevich, Greg Swan, Stuart Jew. We've also picked up some new recruits in Oscar Allen and Sam Draper. They've also drafted Dan Annabelle out of the academy, which is cool. It's been a shaky off-season. But Brisbane has come back from worse and they seem completely unshaken. At the end of the day, anything that happens after 2024 is just a bonus. But boy, wouldn't it be nice if Brisbane could just have one more? So that's the 30 years of the Brisbane Lions. Not 29, it's 30 years since the merger was finalised. Fuck off. If you try to correct me, you will be skinned alive. No, you won't. That's fucking harsh. This was a large video, to put it mildly. I've recorded this in one full fucking session, and my OBS is reading 4 hours and 20 minutes. So that's pretty fucking crazy. But you know, it's hard to condense 30 years of rich history into one video. I appreciate those who have stuck around since I had to stop full-time YouTube. I hope you specifically enjoyed this. I have some more stuff coming in the next couple months, but as I said at the start of the video, uni is my priority at this stage, so please be patient. Thank you for watching up to this point. I appreciate you all, and I will see you soon.